No, Charles Eliot's Committee of 10 and the Carnegie Unit are not the problem. In fact, they're key to the solution. While it makes a great visual to show a bunch of old dead white guys standing around in archaic clothing, getting rid of the Carnegie Unit is not a workable strategy. So what the people with these various foundations and remake organizations want you to believe is that we need to rip out the standards, rip out in this case, the tracks, the standard gauge rails that connected the nation across from Boston to Salt Lake City to California to Florida. We don't need those. We don't need that standard that held things together, and if we just get rid of that standard, we'll be good. That's what they want you to believe. But of course, that leaves us with this: empty paths or no paths, soon to be grown over, and we're all to find our way through the woods alone, be it students or teachers, principals or districts. That's not the way forward. So about 30 years ago, Al Gore and a lot of other people were wandering around talking about the information superhighway. And the poets got on board and they were all telling us how great the information superhighway was going to be and all the things it could do for us. And 30 years later, well, it's more than anyone ever predicted. That's the great part. But how do we get there? It wasn't the poets, and it wasn't a whole lot of Al Gore. So we need to talk about this stuff. Common telephone wire. In this case, 8-wire line. 30 years later, this is what brings me my high-speed internet. This is my information superhighway. It runs out to the street, box unlike that, ties into a T1 cable, which is one of those. There's also a fiber optic cable there. It runs down a bunch of poles like those, goes into town. Mine goes directly into town, but last year they came and they put these things in. And you can see that all the people out here, about a mile from my house, tie in through one of those boxes. You can see the fine condition it's in, which are then tied into this one, which is called a D-slam. Never mind. But that's how you get your internet, which again goes to that fiber optic cable. Took 30 years to get to that. And still along here, I could take you to a number of places where the main line running down the street is just strands of this, or maybe of slightly thicker cable, but oftentimes it's just this. High-speed radio wireless. And yep, there's one 200 feet away. But go down the road 3 miles, that won't reach it, and neither will any other. So what do all those wires have to do with Charles Eliot and the Carnegie Unit and the Committee of 10 that happened when schoolhouses like this dotted the landscape? And train stations like this service the fastest mode of transportation. So the thing to know about Charles Eliot is that although he worked at a time when schools like this were being built as high schools, he started it in the 1850s at a time when the U.S. really didn't have much of an educational system at all when it came to trades, engineering. We had very few engineers, and they were trained in Europe. And that's the period in which he lived his life, and he studied education in Europe and tried to learn from what they did. He also worked as an engineer or an engineering science, a chemist at Harvard, and had worked on industrial processes. Means is, he thought a lot about how to make things work together and work smoothly. And that's what we need to do if we're going to transform high school into the 21st century. Earlier we looked at the wires and boxes and connectors outside, the ones that's buried in the grass and knocked over by the passing cars or shuttled by the wind. And all those things have one thing in common: the contents of this book. Inside this book are the mathematical formulas and ideas of generations of communications, scientists, and mathematicians. This stuff was all known 40 years ago. Some of it still has yet to be fully implemented today. But it lets us put together things like the old modem that you had to actually plug the phone into. And this one went into my laptop a dozen years ago. Typical landline phone. All these things can communicate with the great outdoor world in all its various forms. And allow artists, musicians, teachers, and all the creatives of the world to do the thing they do because of the math and the standards in that book. That's why we need the Carnegie Unit. That's why we still need to tie in high school in a way that makes sense with the old world and allows each part of it to connect to the other in a seamless way.